When I first heard about Silent Hill 2 getting a remake, I couldn't wait to see how Bloober Team would reimagine one of the most iconic horror games of all time. With so many directions they could take, the possibilities were endless. But now having played it, I can confidently say that Bloober Team has nailed their delivery, making a modernized version of Silent Hill 2 that resonates with fans both old and new, recreating this horrific yet real story of what it means to face your inner demons. Pulling this off was by no means an easy task for Bloober, and I'll admit, any doubts that I had were completely unfounded, because they cooked us a whole course meal of pure passion. So let's dive in, comparing both the remake and the original to see how Bloober Team accomplished this balance of both old and new, and just really appreciate all the hard work that has gone into these small details. And there are some very interesting details here. So, with that said, let's get right into the story of Silent Hill 2. So, in the remake, the core story remains the same. You play as James Sunderland drawn to this eerie town called Silent Hill by a letter from his wife Mary, who died 3 years ago. The letter talks about meeting her at their special place, which brings James to explore this mysterious town to find his wife. But while on this endeavor, he encounters others with their own personal reasons for being there. First, you run into Angela in the graveyard, looking for her mother. Then Eddie in the Woodside Apartments, who is a fugitive and wandered into Silent Hill. We also meet Laura, a young girl found running around town who is also looking for Mary. And finally, there's Maria at Rosewater Park, a woman who looks eerily close to Mary, and even stranger, doesn't really have a reason for being there. But as James ventures deeper into town, reality starts unraveling. The world starts distorting into a rusty, nightmarish hellscape, filled with grotesque creatures that echo human suffering. As he reaches their special place, James confronts a shocking truth, and that he killed his own wife, driven by resentment and frustration over her terminal illness. Even Maria turns out to be an illusion, a manifestation of the Mary he wished for, rather than the Mary he lost. And looking back, you realize this town has somehow manifested the trauma James has went through, forcing him to face it head on, instead of trying to forget it and avoid the pain and guilt he caused. These are the dark broad strokes of Silent Hill 2's story, and the remake captures that perfectly. But let's go back and look at the finer details of the story, as well as the characters within it, because that's where you'll find a lot of the differences between the original and the remake. And the first thing you'll notice is the voice acting between Angela and James in the beginning. The pacing is more balanced and slowed down, and the fluctuations between both Angela's and James's voice is more direct, making it easier to understand what they truly mean when talking to each other. And you'll find this to be true with a lot of the cutscenes, making it easier to pick up on the more subtle hints behind each line than the original, where it just felt like everyone was on their 10th cup of coffee, not feeling confident in what they're saying. I mean, just look at this example here. The difference is night and day.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Excuse me.
I'm sorry. I was just...
Hey, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
Yeah.
Now, when talking to Angela, James mentions that he's lost, and she seems almost surprised that he'd be lost. It also sounds as if she doesn't want to come across as crazy or weird, mentioning that there's something wrong with the town, but can't easily explain it. Whereas in the original, she sounds more unsure of the words coming out of her mouth, making her appear slightly crazy. It's very subtle, but makes a huge difference in how you feel towards Angela in the beginning, which I think is very important for a character that has such a deep and serious message to convey later on. Now, continuing forward, you have to do a lot more than the original in terms of exploring and progressing to the Woodside Apartments. First, you have to unlock the auto parts door to Silent Hill, and then get a map to the east side of town. This is when you'll enter the flower shop and find a trail of this stuff from a monster called the Lying Thing. You'll then follow it up the road and into a creepy alleyway and eventually catch the monster going into some building through the garage. When entering this building, you'll find the radio in a room, and this is where the first monster encounter takes place. Similar to the original, but in a different location. Overall, this little encounter feels about the same, with James's go-to weapon being a 4x4 plank, because, why not? But I will say, it's just not as creepy as the original, with it being set in a mysterious blocked-off tunnel. Either way, after you defeat the monster and head out, you're free to explore the town and buildings within it. And since you're able to explore what Silent Hill has to offer, there's a jukebox puzzle in Neely's bar that utilizes the exploration of each building, having to find different parts to get the jukebox up and running again. And once you have it all together, you'll solve this fun yet simple puzzle of playing the record, and gain access to the Woodside apartments shortly after. Once inside, you'll get a map of the apartment and find the coin puzzle really close to where you save, which is very different from the original. You'll find the apartment segment is rearranged just enough to create a new refreshing experience, and some points of interest play out differently. In the original, it's laid out in a more confusing way, and you spend most of your time solving the clock puzzle and going back and forth between the Woodside and Blue Creek apartments for the coin puzzle. Whereas in the remake, you're solving the coin puzzle in Woodside and solving the clock puzzle in Blue Creek. You do, however, still encounter Laura the same way as the original, with her stomping on James's hand and kicking the key away from him, as well as Eddie practically puking out his guts from the dead body in the fridge he supposedly didn't kill. And how could we forget the iconic mirror scene with Angela? In the remake, this scene feels so much deeper and serious with the better pacing and acting, and it makes this iconic scene somehow even better. I will say though, the cutscene with Pyramid Head and the mannequins has been turned down pretty significantly from the original, blocking a lot of the fun Pyramid Head is having, if you know what I mean. Other than that, the cutscenes you encounter in the apartments are more or less the same, just better pacing and voice acting. Also, the layout of the apartment complex are made to be less confusing and feel more straightforward than the original, which can be a good or bad thing depending who you are. But back to the remake, once you finish setting up the clock in the Blue Creek apartment, you'll have to face Pyramid Head and stay alive for a certain amount of time. And all I can say is this battle section is far better than whatever this is. It's almost laughable seeing such a stark difference between these two. That said though, after you survive against Pyramid Head, you walk out of the apartment complex and find yourself on the west side of town. This is when you come across Laura again. Now, not much is altered during this interaction, but there has been some subtle changes. In the original, when James questions what a little girl like her is doing here, she replies saying,
"Huh? Are you blind or something?"
suggesting that she doesn't see the town the same way he does. But in the remake, she responds with,
"I dunno. What's a big dum-dum like you doing here anyway?"
Hey.
It's a very subtle change, and it does a better job at connecting the conversation in a more natural way, but I can't help but feel some of the original messaging has been lost because of this. But it doesn't impact the game too much and does enhance the character of Laura in a different way, making her appear more childlike. Now, after Laura runs away, you continue forward and have some time to think to yourself about what you've just been through. And that's one thing I really like about the pacing of the story. There's a lot more exploration to do when walking around to the next segment, and this gives the player more breathing room to relax and ponder what the hell just happened. And I really appreciate that because I always felt in the original, it moved way too fast and didn't really let anything sit with you because you were already on to the next thing. It's a nice change of pace and works well with the more intense combat system. But that being said, after exploring Rosewater Park, you find Maria along the deck, looking out into the lake. In the remake, she is farther out, which makes her appear more mysterious than the original. You walk up to her, slowly seeing her appear through the dense fog, and when you get up close, James calls out to her, thinking it's his wife. Of course it's not, and he quickly realizes that, but comments on how she could be her twin. You'll also notice that she sounds more lovey-dovey in the remake than the original, with her making certain comments towards James, and takes the lead of guiding him to said special place, instead of James telling her where the special place could be like in the original. Again, another very subtle change that alters the character in a pretty significant way. Now, after this, James follows Maria around the west side of town, and you make your way into Jack's Inn and unlock the gate to continue forward. Once unlocked, you head towards the neighborhood and have to take a long detour and find yourself at Heaven's Night, a fun nightclub for, the family. Of course, Maria takes this chance to tease James by getting up on the stage and tempting him with her good looks and subpar pole dancing skills, but isn't pleased by her bold action, still focused on finding Mary. This makes Maria upset, manipulating him, causing James to feel bad for not understanding her. This leads James questioning if he's crazy for going into this town, thinking Mary could still be here. She says it's one way to put it, but says it's hopeful too. She then offers James a glass, but of course he declines. This leads to Maria raising her glass to what she says,
"To hope, undying."
After this, they both exit Heaven's Night and continue forward. Now, this cutscene is not in the original, but is a great addition to knowing more about Maria and her ways of getting to James. It really brings Maria to life and shows the odd connection between James and Maria. And you also get a glimpse to how Maria manipulates James to care more about her and to care less and less about his wife. And that's not all. There's a whole other cutscene of them together when they make it to the statue of a woman holding a candle. Maria tells this extravagant story of a tale passed down by folks about a woman. She was cast out and sentenced to die on an island in the middle of the Toluca Lake. But there was a guy madly in love with her and would bring her food every night to keep her alive. The woman would always hold a light candle to help him find his way. But one night, there was a terrible storm and blew out the woman's candle, making it impossible for the man to find her. But even then, he never gave up and continued to look for a candle, and eventually fell into the lake and perished. And even though he died, the woman never stopped lighting the candle in hopes of seeing him again. After Maria finishes telling the story, James was understandably irritated, saying she's not here, feeling like his time was wasted coming all this way for some statue. Maria quickly comforts him, saying that everything will be okay. That's when they hear a scream from afar and go towards the theater. Now, at this point, the story starts to align again with the original, just in a different location. In the original, instead of going to Jackson, you go to Pete's bowling area and hear Laura and Eddie talking to each other. When James confronts them, Laura runs off, and this forces James and Maria to track her down, taking them to a back alleyway. Maria unlocks a door in a very interesting way and finds herself in Heaven's Night. Only this time there isn't any cutscene, and it isn't really a highlighted point of interest. But once you exit, you would then follow Laura into the Brookhaven Hospital, which skips the whole part where Maria takes James to the woman's statue. Now, going back to the remake, we'll find some similarities. But of course, like I've said, it's in a different location. When entering the theater, you overhear Eddie and Laura talking to each other. And when James makes his way over, Laura runs off, leaving you to talk with Eddie, similar to the original. During this cutscene, you can feel the hatred Eddie has towards James's passive-aggressive comments towards his eating habits, and it feels more noticeable than the original. Now, after talking to Eddie, you make your way through and end up catching Laura running out of the front of the theater. This has James running into Maria again, and you both follow Laura into the Brookhaven Hospital. And this is where you enter the next segment of the game, where you'll be exploring the hospital and have to find 3 bracelets from the patients the director tried to cure. Of course, before searching for the bracelets, Maria decides to get some rest and lays down from not feeling well. But you continue forward and solve the bracelet puzzle and decipher a simple combination which gives you a key to the rooftop, allowing you to enter the elevator maintenance area. Now, when heading back out, you get surprised by Pyramid Head waiting right outside, putting James in a chokehold and throwing him down the elevator shaft. Miraculously, James survives and wakes up back inside the hospital and continues searching for Laura. Eventually, you find her in a room playing with her teddy bear. James calls out to her using her name and tries to get on her good side. She quickly questions how he knows her and gets annoyed when finding out Eddie told him. James continues and asks why she keeps running away from him and how she knows about Mary. Laura tries to avoid this question, fearing of being yelled at by James, but eventually Laura finally confesses and says that Mary is her friend and that they met at the hospital last year. This causes James to instantly raise his voice and accuse her of lying. And of course, Laura gets mad and tries running away, but James catches up and blocks her. Laura then decides to do a little trick on James by luring him into a room, mentioning Mary's letter is somewhere in there. When James enters this room, Laura quickly locks him from behind, and this is when James hears a horrible monster is in the room with him, making James plead to Laura to unlock the door. But being the brat that she is, she doesn't listen and runs off, leaving James to fend for himself. This is when you encounter the fleshlit monster and have a mini boss fight. Again, this battle section is far better than the original and brings a lot of life to the combat. It's honestly like comparing stale french fries to a fresh new batch. It's a pretty big difference. But once you defeat the monster, you get picked up by another one and wake up in a different part of the hospital. But this time you're in the other world, with everything being covered in rust and dirty cloth. After this, you find a heavily locked box involving a key, a code, and a combination. And all I can say is, a box that locked must have something pretty foul. But that's just me. Anyways, in order to fully unlock the box, you have to explore the hospital and solve 3 various puzzles. And once you finally open the box, you find nothing. No, literally, it's nothing, and I believe this is a reference to the original, when James says that he found nothing in the box before correcting himself, saying he found a few strands of hair, which for some reason is like really important in the original. It's just very strange. Anyhow, after you open the box, you find a door with a lady on it and gain access to the basement area. This is when you find her copper ring and run into Maria, getting one of the funniest moments in the game.
Oh. Maria, I thought... Sorry. Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway? What do you mean, anyway? I was almost killed back there. I have never been so scared in my whole life. All you care about is that dead wife of yours.
You couldn't care less about me, could you?
Honestly, I'm so glad that they kept this in, and it's just as funny as the original, if not more. But once Maria lets it all out on poor James, they find a lead ring in the refrigerator and use both rings to unlock the lady door. But before going in, Maria doesn't feel this is a good idea. It's almost like she knows something horrible is about to happen to her. And honestly, that's pretty valid, because when you go down the stairway, both James and Angela get chased by Pyramid Head, with James barely making it into the elevator in time, and Angela getting brutally turned into a shish kebab, even though she was in front of James on the cutscene. But I digress. James is understandably devastated, but he keeps going and finds a key to unlock the front entrance of the hospital. While looking out at the dimly lit town, you see Laura running from a distance, and this is where you exit the hospital and follow Laura into the dark hellscape of Silent Hill. Now, in the original, similar to the apartment complex, everything is ordered differently and is made to be more confusing. Instead of exploring the hospital trying to find 3 bracelets, you're finding ways to unlock doors in other areas of the hospital to progress forward. One main point of interest is the green drain you find on the 3rd floor. And around the same area, Maria feels under the weather and decides to rest, allowing you to find a key to the rooftop in the same room. By going up to the rooftop, you encounter Pyramid Head, but instead of pushing you down the elevator, he pushes you off the side of the damn building. Pretty hardcore if you ask me. After this close death experience, you find a needle and a strand of hair from the heavily locked box to use for the green drain, which would allow you to access the 1st floor hallway. And when entering, you'd then find Laura the same way in the remake, and the cutscene plays more or less the same. But once you defeat the fleshlit monster, you would enter the other world of the hospital and go down to the basement and come across Maria. And just like the remake, she gets upset at him, manipulating him to care more about her. After this, James and Maria open the refrigerator and get all the rings to unlock the door with the lady on it and make your way down. And strangely enough, Maria doesn't mention at all about having a bad feeling going down. But just like the remake, Pyramid Head chases them down and only James makes it out alive. And when getting the key to the front entrance, you see Laura running away from a distance. So as you can see here, the remake again keeps the highlighted points of interest, but rearranges the order of the puzzles as well as adding more to them to get more game time. Again, keeping that balance of old and new. Now, back to the remake, after you exit the hospital, you get to explore the dark hellscape of Silent Hill when following Laura. But on your way, you hear a payphone ringing from a distance, and when answering it, you hear nothing, but you do get a wrench and a letter telling James there's a key under the woman's statue at Rosewater Park. Using the wrench, you go through a big tunnel and past the horrifying Mandarin monsters. And as you make your way to the woman's statue, you come across Angela, and get a whole new cutscene that wasn't in the original.
I'm happy to see you.
Happy to see me?
Alive, I mean.
Oh. Yeah. I better get going.
still don't want me to go with you? If we stick together, we might just make it out of here.
Out of where?
This town. Silent Hill.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Oh, you didn't happen to see a little girl around here, did you?
A little girl?
Yeah, Angela? Are you all right? Angela?
No. Please. You shouldn't be here.
Angela, it's okay.
No, don't touch me!
It's by far one of the best added scenes in the remake. This cutscene does such a good job at showing the trauma Angela has gone through and makes you care even more about her than the original, because in the scene, she doesn't come across as crazy. It feels more like she's gone through something, and it makes you more interested in knowing what happened, and you really start to care for her well-being. There's a bunch of subtle clues during their conversation, and it fits so well into this game that I almost forgot this cutscene isn't even part of the original, which just highlights how well this cutscene has been crafted. Now, after this encounter, James, as usual, ends up scaring Angela away, leaving him to go back to the statue and find the box, which has the key to the historical society. After this, you make your way through the dark fog and enter the building, finding relics of the past connected to Silent Hill. You also find the story Maria talks about earlier at the park in this old book, but it plays out a little differently. Instead, the woman was actually taken to the island for witchcraft, and the man perished because he was following the reflection of the moonlight and not the candle, eventually dying in the water. It's interesting how this story has two versions, with both endings having the man perish, and could be symbolizing James and Mary's relationship in some way. Either way, after exploring the historical society, you make your way down this oddly placed staircase that goes on for way too long. I don't know how they did it, but somehow the remake feels even longer than the original, and I thought that was too long. But I digress. Once you make it down, you enter the Toluca prison and then have to jump down a series of holes. This is when James finds himself at the prison cafeteria, where you'll encounter Eddie holding a gun, finding out how crazy he actually is. This is where you figure out Eddie has a lot of pent-up anger from people making fun of him over the years, causing him to kill anyone that even looks towards his direction. He even killed a dog, and some of you already know how I feel about that. Anyways, towards the end, he tries to play it off as a joke and walks out of the cafeteria. Now, in the original, Eddie feels more exaggerated and almost sounds cartoonish at times, making him feel less connected to the conversation with James. Because of that, the remake feels more impactful than the original, with it portraying Eddie in a more grounded conversation. I personally think this suits Eddie better because he doesn't come across as funny and instead is more concerning. Now, after this, in the remake, you have to solve a weight puzzle in the prison yard to explore the 4 doors. And once you've gone through all 4 of them, you'll use all the weights to get the execution lever for the final puzzle. This is when you have to match each half of the 6 confessions and select the one that is justified in their actions. When chosen correctly, you'll fall farther down and have to jump down 2 more holes, as well as go down even more in an elevator to enter the next segment of the game. Now, this is very different from the original. Instead, you have to find 3 tablets, that being the seductress, the oppressor, and the gluttonous pig. Then place all of them on the shrine in the prison yard. After this, you get a horseshoe to use on a trapdoor as a handle, combining it with wax. You then enter and jump down 2 more holes, as well as going down the elevator, finding yourself in the labyrinth, which is a little different from the remake since you find yourself heading towards Angela instead. Now, when entering Angela's room, you see her pleading to her father not to hurt her, and she's almost gone into this childlike state. Angela quickly shouts out to her dad, but before James could react, the monster attacks James, and this begins the mini-boss with abstract I don't know who the hell comes up with these names, but I am not saying that. Let's just say Abstract Dad for short. So this is when the mini-boss for Abstract Dad begins. And I know I keep saying this, but these battle sections are done so well, and there's so much more tension from trying to stay alive from this horrifying thing. You're also getting more story about how her dad treated Angela, hearing him yell at her over the TV between each round. In the original, you're stuck in this small room, and it feels so void of energy and tension compared to the remake. I also think it manages to make you feel really gross, and lets you realize what has truly happened to Angela. And the farther you get into this battle, the grosser it gets, with the environment decaying, showing human skin and rusty pistons. Even the noises in the background horrifically capture what Angela has gone through. It's horrible, and by the time you defeat this monster, it's not a happy victory, and you just feel so bad for Angela. And you don't get this feeling from the original because it doesn't hit as hard when you're watching her go through it again, reliving those traumatic memories, because the game doesn't spend enough time showing the player what she's been through. And in the remake, it's doing so much. It's not only doing the battle section, it's telling a story about Angela and her dad when she was growing up. There is so much going on here, and I honestly think this is like the best part of the game. Now, after this, you enter the labyrinth and have to explore the rotten, desolate, and finally the ruined area, using this mechanism to rotate this cube to get to each area. During these sections, you'll be dealing with the Mandarins and other monsters you've encountered, as well as Pyramid Head. But before you do this, you find Maria alive behind a jail cell, seemingly waiting for you. And in this remake, this conversation between Maria and James is still so fascinating and captures the same uncanny feeling from the original. In the remake, Maria comes off as less lifelike and more monotone than the original, giving off this even creepier vibe when she changes back to normal, tempting James with her looks. I always thought the scene with Maria felt very synthetic, and I love that you get the same feeling from the remake. Now, going forward, towards the end of the ruined area, you encounter Pyramid Head again, and have to run away and lead him through the hallway of arms. Eventually he disappears, and you enter the jail cell where Maria was located, only to find her dead on the bed. This is also the same as the original, but just in a different order. In the original, you'd first encounter Angela and fight Abstract Dad, before finding Maria. Anyhow, after this, you go back and find the Great Knife, a weapon only Pyramid Head uses, so you can get through the hallway of arms to continue forward, entering an underground graveyard. When jumping down one of the graves, you encounter Eddie again in a freezer-type environment. You hear Eddie talking to one of the dead bodies, asking why he keeps coming back. James confronts Eddie, asking what he's doing. He quickly explains by repeating the horrible things said to him over the years, and goes into how it doesn't matter now because he can make them stop by killing them in cold blood, saying a dead corpse can't laugh. During this cutscene, you can really get a feel for how much he's dropped off the deep end, and it feels more serious and scary than the original because the voice acting is just so good. Being able to hear the true anger in his voice and hearing him say these crazy ideas out loud without it sounding funny is such an improvement. It even gets rid of the odd section of fighting in this small tight room where it just becomes a health contest. Instead, you instantly go into the meat freezer and take Eddie on in a gunfight. There's 3 stages, and each of them slowly get harder with more fog blocking your view and your only cover constantly moving around. It's done really well, and Eddie's death scene is just as good. Now, after this, in both the remake and original, James takes a boat and uses it to paddle over to the Lakeview Hotel, in hopes of finding Mary's special place. When going through the hotel and entering the reception area, you find out the videotape James and Mary made is located in the hotel safe. You also find a music box puzzle in the lobby that needs 3 figurines, that being Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, and Snow White, to solve and get the key to floor 3. As you explore, Laura startles you with a piano and starts talking with James. After a little bit of small talk, Laura asks if he knows where Mary is, and how Mary mentioned it in her letter. James, curious, reads the letter given to Laura, and when reading it, you find out this was a goodbye letter to Laura for when she passed away. She also hints that if she was better, she probably would have taken Laura in. She then ends the letter wishing her a happy 8th birthday. This causes James to ask when Laura's birthday was, and she tells him it was a week ago, meaning Mary couldn't have died 3 years ago. James starts questioning himself, feeling like he's going crazy. Laura then mentioned there was another letter meant for James, but she had lost the letter somehow, even though she's never opened it. This causes Laura to run off in search of the missing letter. Now, interestingly enough, there's a slight change in the remake. In the original, Laura lost the envelope and letter altogether. But in the remake, she only loses the letter, which makes me wonder if James has already gone through the letter before even entering Silent Hill. This letter was meant for him to read after she passed away from her illness. But since he killed her, reading this letter probably made him realize what he's just done to his wife. It might explain why he doesn't remember anything beyond this point of coming to Silent Hill, not wanting to face the pain he's caused upon his loving wife. But moving on, after Laura runs off, you explore the different areas of the hotel, slowly getting closer to the room 312, where Mary and James' special place is located. Once you go through all the puzzles and gather the keys needed to continue, James finally enters room 312, and this is where he finally watches the videotape. At first it starts out normal with James filming Mary in the hotel room during their vacation. But as soon as she starts coughing, that's when it takes a huge turn and shows James using a pillow to suffocate Mary. After James watches the video, you can see the realization of what he's done and the delusions he's made to avoid the pain he's caused. When Laura comes into the room and asks why Mary died, you can see it in his eyes. The pain it causes him to tell her the truth that he in fact killed her. And it gives me goosebumps every time. He looks in absolute shock, and you can tell he's still in disbelief that it's true. Of course, this makes Laura hate James and she runs off crying. Now, as much as I love the original, this is such an improvement. The subtle face animations and voice acting really grounds what James has done, making this conversation between Laura and James more heartbreaking and shocking at the same time. Now, after this, the hotel starts rotting away, becoming heavily ruined. But while sitting in the chair, James gets a radio signal from what sounds like Mary calling out for him. This brings James to continue forward, and you go through the ruined hotel, eventually running into Angela standing in a fiery room along the staircase. At first, Angela seems a bit crazy, mistaking James for her mom, but quickly snaps out of it. James apologizes to her and says that she was right all along. She thanks him for his help earlier before, but says her mother is right and that she deserved it. James disagrees, but Angela says to not pity her because she's not worth it. She then goes on, thinking James just wants the same as all the other men in her life. She then demands him to give back the knife, but James refuses. And Angela makes a remark accusing him of saving it for himself. She then walks away up the fiery stairs, and while doing so, James comments how hot the room is. And Angela, almost surprised, asks if he sees it too, and says it's always like this. Then you watch her walk up the stairs and slowly disappear into the fire. Overall, this cutscene is the same as the original, but definitely a bonus seeing the more subtle expressions in both James and Angela. After watching Angela walk away, you continue forward and enter a room where Maria is restrained and is killed for the third time. This sends James into a mental breakdown, but he finally puts it all together and realizes that he doesn't need Pyramid Head anymore for his guilt and pain. After this, you have to survive against 2 of these Pyramid Heads until they both unalive themselves. Once they've stopped, you grab both the Scarlet and Rusty Egg to unlock the doors to continue. When walking through the hallway, James reminisces the horrible things Mary has said to him while she was sick. And I gotta say, the acting is absolutely amazing here and really sells the almost bipolar emotions Mary had during her terminal illness. But when you finally get to Mary, or Maria dressed up as Mary, she tells him how they can be together forever. But James realizes that he doesn't need her anymore, and that this can't go on, saying it's time to let go. Of course, Maria doesn't take this too well and turns into some horrific monster attacking James. This starts the final boss fight where you have to kill Maria, and once you put an end to it, you get a visualization of James coming forth about how he felt towards Mary. He tells her how much he hated her and wanted her out of the way and wanted his life back. But she questions James, saying if that were true, then why do you look so sad? After this, she hands him the letter that Laura lost, telling him this is what he came for. This is where you can get different endings, with each one having Mary read out loud the letter given to James. The letter is Mary acknowledging the horrible things she has said to James and how she loves him and hopes he can continue life and start fresh. This first ending I got was the leaving ending, where you seem to take Laura in and walk out of the town together. There's also the in water ending where James talks to Mary in his car, looking back at what's probably her deceased body. He's unable to continue without her, so he drives into the lake, putting an end to his story. There's also the Maria ending where, before the boss fight, Mary is waiting for James on the bed. In this ending, Mary is the one fighting to get James to tell the truth. And in the end, James chooses Maria to take with him to live his fantasy of what he wanted his wife to be. But unfortunately, Maria coughs towards the end, hinting that she'll become sick similar to Mary, putting James in a horrible loop. There's also the rebirth ending where James instantly knows it's not Mary, and it's Maria. James decides to go and bring back Mary by going somewhere along the lake, saying the old gods haven't left this place and that it's possible to recreate his wife. Now, normally this would be it besides the fun joke endings, but in the remake there are two more. The first one is called Stillness, where he talks to Mary in the car and she actually responds and appears with him. James quickly apologizes to her and she accepts the apology. He also questions if she's been waiting for him, and she says she's always been waiting for him. That's when James drives the car into the lake, similar to the In Water ending. Now, the other ending is called Bliss, where James watches the videotape but puts himself inside to be with Mary forever, leaving the reality without her. When the tape eventually ends, it shows James nowhere to be seen, with the chair now empty. Now, those are most of the endings, besides the brilliant jokes with the UFO, and how could we forget the dog ending. But that is the full in-depth story of Silent Hill 2. As you can tell, a lot of it has just been rearranged or extended to last longer to add more playtime. Which makes sense. I mean, this game is $70. I wouldn't want this game to end in less than 8 hours. So I think this was the best way to go about it. I also really like how they switch things up just enough to create a new refreshing playthrough for old fans, but still keep it to the original with the cutscenes more or less being the same, just improved upon. It seems that Bloober Team made a priority to keep the plot untouched, but change everything in between those plot points, as well as adding parts to emphasize them. It's honestly a genius plan because by doing so, they're making both old and new fans happy by keeping the story the same and emphasizing it with new elements. I mean, it even gives old fans a refreshing experience because so much of the gameplay is new or rearranged. It's no wonder this remake is praised so highly. But now that we've gone through the story, let's take a closer look at the characters and compare them on a deeper level besides just their story. Starting with the most interesting of the bunch, Maria. When looking at the concept art for Maria, you can see what the team was going for, checking all the boxes of what the beauty standards were for the early 2000s/80s. And you can see that in the final model, where she has bleached hair with pink on the ends, a pink skirt with leopard patterns all over it, and of course her classic crop top and a choker to bring it all together. She quite literally finds every way to stand out for James, from her makeup all the way to her clothing. And this design choice was no mistake. It makes perfect sense with the story because Maria is an idolization of what James wanted Mary to be, which is also why there are similarities between both Mary and Maria. To put it short, Maria is a more sexualized version of Mary that has deep love for James, shown through her flirtatious interactions. It's also interesting how Maria finds ways to manipulate James to feel bad for giving more attention to his dead wife, enforcing this idea that James is trying to avoid any notion that he killed Mary. Maria is a very deep character, and I think that's why people were so harsh when her new look was revealed, because everything about her character has a deep meaning to the story, and by changing things, it could ruin the main message. So people got upset by the fact Maria wasn't as risque as the original, instead wearing a violet red jacket with a black leopard patterned dress underneath. Her whole vibe gives off this going to a nightclub in the rain type of feel, if you know what I mean. It's different and loses some of the bold colors from the original, but I do think overall it still works, just needs brighter colors to convey the same feeling. Now, I will say there's a huge improvement with her face. In the original, she came across a lot older because of the sharp edges along her facial features. But when looking at the remake, it's a lot better and she actually appears 25 years old instead of in her mid-30s. And it gives Maria a lot of life and energy, and for me that makes up for the less energetic clothing chosen for her. Now, since we're on the topic of Maria, let's compare Mary. When looking at her original model, her fashion sense is very dated is the best way to put it. Wearing pink pastel colors with a flower-covered dress, and similar to Maria, she comes across a lot older because of the sharper modeling. And combining that with her clothing, she looks like a grandma at times. It is possible that this was done on purpose to convey James's uninterest with his wife, seeing her as this unattractive person. The pastel colors also might be a representation of the kind of colors you'd see in a hospital. It's important to remember, James had to stop his whole life to take care of Mary and had to deal with her verbal abuse because of her outbursts dealing with this horrible disease. Overall, I think the remake has improved her immensely and better conveys the huge similarities between Maria and Mary's facial features. That, and she actually looks 25 years old. So I would say Mary's remake is a huge success in that regard. But now let's take a look at James Sunderland. Now, I've always liked the original look of James. He comes off as this regular guy. He's not some action hero or this special agent with years of combat training. I'm looking at you, Leon. He's just James, and the clothing reflects that, with him wearing a normal heavy jacket with a couple layers underneath. And I don't know if this was intentional, but his design is very square shaped. And in the art industry, shape has a lot of meaning behind it, used to reflect the character in some way. The reason I bring this up is because squares give off this very rigid and stiff feeling, maybe reflecting James's rigid thinking and ignorance to what he's done to his wife. Square shapes also resemble a grumpier and angrier appearance rather than, say, a circle, which again fits perfectly with his hatred towards Mary. I also really like his facial features of James, because he looks like he's really going through it, which in my opinion doesn't come across as well in the remake. He looks a little too put together for what he's going through. I actually really liked the original model of him during the teaser trailer because of this. He looked so tired and exhausted, with his face unshaven and his eyes and cheeks sunken in as if he hadn't eaten in days. It's really good, but I can see why people thought it was too much. I will say I do appreciate the attention to detail as you progress, reflecting how it's impacting him physically. Maybe what they could have done is use that older model towards the end to make that change more impactful. But really, this is just a nitpick, and I think Bloober Team did a fine job with James, even if he kinda looks like Leon's long-lost brother. But moving on, let's take a look at Laura. Now, surprisingly, not a lot is known about her besides that she's an orphan that bonded with Mary at the hospital. It's never explained how she made it into Silent Hill and how she gets around so quickly, but we do know that she most likely sees the town differently. I'd imagine it's brighter and sunnier, reflecting the innocence of a young 8-year-old. And I think in the original, her model somewhat reflected that. She had this denim dress over this colorful striped shirt. The only thing that really hurt the design of this character is the modeling of her face. She appears a lot older because of the sharper facial features. When creating a younger character, you have to keep in mind that kids have rounder features than adults. And in this design, it just doesn't fit that well. But thankfully, in the remake, her design was improved quite a bit, having brighter colors and smoother features to convey that she's a young child. The only problem, and I'm sorry for pointing this out if you haven't noticed, her freakishly long arms. They are just way too long for her body. When looking at anatomy, you'll find that usually the hand will be just past the waistline. But instead, her arms go way beyond that, almost reaching her knees. And now every time I see her, I just can't get past those long arms. And again, I'm sorry if I ruined it for you, but other than that, she's a perfect remake of Laura. Just gotta straighten out the anatomy a bit. That said, let's take a look at the next character, Eddie. Eddie has dealt with a lot of bullying throughout his life for his looks, and this is why he lashes out, shooting anyone that even looks his way. In his mind, he's giving back what they deserve and is protecting himself because no one else was considerate enough to stand up for him. And this is reflected in what Eddie sees in Silent Hill. For him, the town is cold and frozen. Whenever you're near him, you can see his breath and usually has something cold related with him. For example, the ice cream in the theater, the frozen corpses killed by Eddie, and of course the meat freezer. This is how Eddie sees the world, and we only get a glimpse into it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the main color he wears is blue and white, a perfect color to reflect the cold winter. Now, in the original, he appears pretty young, wearing a blue baseball cap backwards with a blue and white collar polo shirt to fit, as well as blue wristbands, and of course the cargo shorts. I always assumed he was in his late teens, but he's actually 23, which totally surprised me. I think this has to do a lot with his height and how round his facial features are. And I guess to me, it made more sense that he'd get bullied more in a high school type environment rather than a college area. Either way, the remake changes Eddie quite significantly. He appears the correct age this time around, and wears a blue and white collared jacket instead of a shirt. Overall, I really like his design. During the cutscenes, he's a lot scarier and comes off grosser than the original. His voice acting is also really good and captures the original, but improves upon it, again, making him crazy, but a more grounded crazy, if that even makes sense. But moving on, let's take a look at the last character, Angela, and see if all that hate was really warranted. Now, Angela is a victim of sexual abuse from her father when she was a young girl. She wasn't really shown love by her brother or mother, enforcing this idea that she deserved what happened to her. This is part of why she sees the town on fire. She deserves to be in hell, so to speak, for what she thinks she's done. This has caused a lot of long-term mental health issues such as depression, PTSD, and social anxiety, as well as entrophobia, an intense or irrational fear of men. The reason I bring this up is because her clothing makes more sense within these contexts. She covers herself up as much as possible with a long sleeve sweater, pants, and shoes, either because she doesn't like seeing her body or doesn't want others looking. Now, in the original, she always looked a lot older than 19, looking almost 40 because of her sharp facial features. And people argue it was done on purpose, to show how her past has aged her from all the traumatic stress she's been through since growing up, which is a fair argument. But when you see that she's supposedly 19 years old, it's really hard to believe, and I think they went a bit too far with aging her. When looking at other characters, you can see they had some difficulties making characters look young. Now, whether that's because of limitations back then or just a mistake is up for discussion. But I think this is probably why Angela looks a lot older than the team might have intended. Thankfully, the remake gets this right, making her look 19 years old. And even though her clothing is more or less the same, I love the small detail of having her turtleneck all the way up covering her whole neck. It's a subtle difference, but really adds to how blocked off she is from everyone, out of fear of someone looking at her for the wrong reasons. It really adds to her character, in the same way they have modeled the ends of her fingers to look like she's been biting at her nails excessively, showing the amount of anxiety she's been going through. So overall, I really don't know what people were so upset with when it came to her design. It's the most strangest thing I've seen in a while because her design has been improved so much. But I am glad it's settled down and people are realizing how amazing she actually is. So I feel pretty confident in saying that all these characters have been improved upon from the original. There are some slight faults here and there, but I think Bloober Team did a great job at properly showing the ages of each character and reflecting who they are through their design. But now that we've looked at the characters, let's dive into the gameplay and see how Bloober Team consistently keeps us on our toes through the added 17 plus hours of gameplay. Now, the first thing you'll notice is the new over-the-shoulder camera system. It's a pretty significant change compared to the dynamic fixed camera angles from the original, bringing it up to modern standards, and I think Bloober Team did a fantastic job at reworking the game so it all just works nicely together. By having this new camera system, it makes you feel more involved and connected to James and the characters he meets. By bringing everything closer to the player, you feel more immersed in this town of Silent Hill, and you can't go wrong with that. But even so, I do think Bloober Team missed out on an opportunity here to involve more fixed dynamic camera angles. In the original, this camera system would sometimes be used to make the player feel on edge and scared of what's to come, and at times made you feel like you were being watched, which doesn't really happen in the remake. For example, at the beginning of the game, when you're walking through the woods, there's a point when the camera angle changes to a different perspective watching James. It's almost like you're seeing through the eyes of someone or something watching James inside the darkness of the woods. It's unsettling and brings a lot of character to the game, and I think by not having these moments in the remake, it really misses that unique characteristic from older games. Now, I'm not saying the whole game should be from a fixed camera angle. It's actually quite the opposite. Instead, I think it should be used sparingly to create silent jump scares that makes the player uneasy while walking through Silent Hill 2. It would make the gameplay stand out more, and I think fans both old and new would love this introduced into the remakes, so long as it makes sense. Now, moving on, let's talk about probably the most controversial aspect of the game when it was first announced: the combat. When the combat trailer was released, it set off quite a bit of fans because it came across as too much of an action game. It was a huge dent in the marketing that, from what it sounds like, was Konami's fault. You can learn more about it here if it interests you. But now having played it, I can say with full confidence that this just isn't the case here. I think the remake does a good job at making the combat more exciting and balanced, with added combat elements such as dodging, a better aiming system, and a total overhaul of every monster, forcing you to learn their moves and characteristics. For example, the lying things can shoot projectile vomit with acid-like qualities and can choose to headbutt you if it gets close enough. The bubblehead nurses found in the hospital use metal pipes to swing at you randomly, making it hard to dodge them. And how can we forget the mannequins? These guys are both the most horrifying thing in the game and annoying because of how many you deal with. These bastards can hide behind basically anything if they have enough room. It's the creepiest thing because not only do they jump scare you, but their mannerisms are a lot like spiders. They'll hiss at you and will pounce on you like a goddamn tarantula. So if you have arachnophobia, you're not off the hook here. Especially when you get into the Toluca prison, where you'll encounter them crawling on the walls and ceilings. It's absolutely horrific, and I'll never see mannequins the same again. That said, you get what I'm saying, the monsters have been greatly improved upon from the stale, clunky combat of the original. There's just so much more energy and tension within these monsters, and the variety is a lot better with the variants of monsters in the other world. It really keeps the game exciting, which is heavily needed when the original only has like 5 common enemies, not including the boss fights. And that's another great improvement with the gameplay. The boss fights are absolutely amazing and bring so much needed life to the monsters from the original. It's like comparing a beta test to the finished game. The Pyramid Head battle sections was fun and exciting, with the abstract data and the final boss being one of my absolute favorites of the bunch because of the fun gameplay. It was always interesting seeing what the monsters would do next during these battle sections, and it really kept you on your toes because of how creative they were. Which, I mean, comparing it to the original, there's just no comparison here. I mean, it had to be changed. The last thing that I really respect from Bloober Team is just the sheer amount of settings that allow you to play the game however you want. You can alter or get rid of the UI elements that could ruin the immersion for you. You're able to change the interaction icons or get rid of them altogether. You're able to change the appearance of the combat HUD. You can also change the difficulty of the puzzles and enemies, bringing a different experience. And the cherry on top are the filters, giving you that fun sense of nostalgia. It's really great and something that I appreciate Bloober Team for doing. By allowing players to have an expression over how they want to play, really helps to make both fans old and new happy without making any huge sacrifices, which helps to bring a nice balance between old and new. And speaking of new, I want to take a moment to talk about this reoccurring theme of James possibly being in some kind of loop. Throughout the remake, you'll find glimpses into the past where you'll come across locations and objects from the original. Now, I know this by itself doesn't really mean anything, this could just be a fun Easter egg for old fans. But things get more involved when you have full cutscenes and lines from characters farther pointing you towards the notion that this loop theory might have some legitimacy to it. For example, you'll encounter the original location of Heaven's Night, where Maria feels familiar with the place, saying she experienced deja vu. You also have the conversation between Maria and James at Pete's bowling area, where James tells Maria she can stay outside, referencing the original where Maria decides not to go in. But instead, Maria gets confused and insists that she wants to tag along, questioning why he would ever think that, making James slightly confused, saying it was just a stray thought. You also have James experiencing deja vu when entering the park after finding Maria, almost surprised that the park is different. And let's not forget Maria had a bad feeling about going down the staircase in the hospital, foreshadowing the horrible events that would soon take place. All these moments in the game take time to develop, and I feel strongly that this has more meaning than just a fun nod for old fans. I think there's something legitimate here that explains more about what is going on in the town of Silent Hill. And this idea is farther proven on a very recent discovery by Dale Robinson on the Silent Hill Reddit page. Basically, in the game, you can find 26 different Polaroid pictures throughout the remake, each having a phrase written on the front and a number on the back. For quite a while, these strange photos were a mystery. Some people thought these photos were taken by James or some other character in the game, given some of the locations in the picture. Others thought this was just a fun Easter egg with no legitimate puzzle or code behind it. But eventually, Dale Robinson figured out that if you count the objects inside each photo and connect it to the words by counting across the phrase, you would get a letter from all 26 pictures, forming a whole sentence. And when putting it all together, you get this: "You've been here for 2 decades." This is probably the most solid evidence that James is inside some kind of loop. People do also mention that this could just be written towards fans, being some kind of meta statement. But I think this could be tied to both, being written to fans while also being written to James. Either way, it's a very fascinating theory with some substantial evidence from the remake that really gets you thinking. This whole theme of nodding to the original is honestly so brilliant because it makes new fans interested in the original, while while also being a form of fan service. And it's the same kind of brilliance that makes the gameplay so good, because the remake constantly surprises older fans with new layouts and overhauled enemy combat. And as an older fan, you feel pretty confident in what to expect, thinking it would, be a remake of the original. You don't expect things to switch up too much, but the more you progress, the more you realize you have no idea what to expect. And these glimpses to the past and the characters referencing the original is almost like the game is making fun of the fact that you don't know what to expect anymore. Maybe this is just my personal experience, but I really loved that and kept the game refreshing even though I played the original hundreds of times. This is why the remake is so brilliant. It enhances everything from the original while still looking and feeling the same, and somehow still manages to add new elements that emphasize what made the original so great. It keeps this brilliantly crafted story alive about a tragic yet real story of what it means as a human being to work through our own trauma and face them head on. After playing this game, I've now truly understood the meaning of Silent Hill 2, and that we all have our own Silent Hills we have to face. The mental battles that we all deal with in silence. It's uncomfortable and scary, and it's hard not to avoid it because it's not the part of us we want to see. But it doesn't have to be done alone. It can be accomplished. And we can eventually get over our Silent Hill. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. This video took a lot longer than I thought it would, but it was totally worth seeing it all come together. If you enjoyed this video and want to support me in making future videos like this one, check out my Patreon where you can get tons of digital exclusives and early access to future videos. Or learn about another great psychological horror game called Soma. All that said, see you next time.